"Can I tune your piano in exchange for a loaf of bread?" They laughed until they heard the harmony. The Manhattan School of Music buzzed with final preparations for the season's benefit concert. Renowned musicians adjusted their instruments, while conductor William Thompson reviewed for the last time the scores that would be presented that special evening. It was then that the door to the main hall opened slowly, and a boy of about 12 entered hesitantly. Ethan Miller held in his hands a small case of tools worn by time and wore a faded button-down shirt that had clearly once belonged to someone larger. "Excuse me," said the boy, his voice trembling but determined. "Can I tune your piano in exchange for a loaf of bread?" Silence fell over the room. Violinist Sophia Williams stopped adjusting the strings of her instrument. Pianist Michael Johnson let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Are you joking, kid? This is a $200,000 Steinway. It's not a toy for a child to mess with," said Michael, adjusting his impeccable black tuxedo. "I know how to tune," insisted Ethan, taking a timid step forward. "My father taught me. He worked at the Harmony Piano Factory before—" "Before what?" asked Sophia, intrigued by the strange glint she noticed in the boy's brown eyes. Ethan lowered his gaze. "Before he got sick. Now he can't work anymore, and I need to help at home." Conductor William, a 60-year-old man with graying hair and gold-rimmed glasses, watched the scene in silence. There was something about the boy's posture that caught his attention. It wasn't just desperation for food. There was a genuine connection to music that he recognized after decades in the artistic world. "How old are you, son?" asked William, approaching. 12, sir. But I've been tuning pianos since I was 8. My father always said I had a special ear for it." Michael snorted angrily. "Maestro, please, we have a concert in 2 hours. We can't waste time with this." "Perhaps we should give the boy a chance," suggested Eleanor Davis, the cellist. At 55, she had seen many talents emerge from the most unlikely places. "You don't understand," said Ethan, his voice gaining a desperate urgency. "I'm not asking for charity. I really know how to do this. I can prove it." Sophia exchanged looks with William. There was something in the sincerity of those words that touched her heart. She herself came from humble origins and remembered how difficult it was to get her first opportunity. "All right," decided William, "but you only have 5 minutes, and if you damage anything—" "I won't damage anything, I promise," Ethan interrupted, running to the piano with an agility that surprised everyone. He opened his small case and took out tools that, although worn, were impeccably organized and clean. With precise movements, he began to examine the inside of the instrument. "I see someone tried to tune this piano recently," said Ethan without taking his eyes off the strings. "But they left the middle A a bit high, and the low E is vibrating strangely." Michael turned red with anger. He himself had tuned the piano the previous morning. "How can you know that just by looking?" he challenged. Ethan played a single key. The sound echoed through the hall, and he closed his eyes, concentrating. "It's not just by looking," he replied, picking up one of his tools. "It's by listening." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. In the following minutes, Ethan worked with a precision that left everyone speechless. His small hands moved among the strings with the dexterity of someone who had done it thousands of times. With each adjustment, he tested the sound, his expression revealing a deep concentration that didn't match his age. "Done," he announced, closing the piano lid. "Now it's tuned." William approached the piano and played a few chords. The sound that came out was crystalline, perfect. Each note vibrated with a purity he hadn't heard in a long time. "My goodness," murmured Eleanor. "How did he manage that so quickly?" "And with such precision," added Sophia, also testing her violin against the piano notes. Michael was silent, clearly displeased. He had spent nearly an hour trying to tune that same piano and hadn't achieved even half the perfection the boy had reached in just a few minutes. "Where did you learn this?" asked William, genuinely impressed. "From my father, old Robert Miller. He worked 15 years at the Harmony Factory. He said every piano has its own personality, its own voice. You just need to know how to listen." "And what happened to him?" Sophia wanted to know. Ethan's face darkened. He developed a lung problem from the varnishes and glues at the factory. The doctors said he can no longer work with chemicals. Now he stays at home, coughing a lot and unable to afford his medicine. A heavy silence fell over the hall. Eleanor discreetly wiped a tear that insisted on forming in the corner of her eye. "And you? How can you do this so well, being so young?" asked William. "I always went with him to the factory after school. At first, I just watched. But then he started teaching me. He said I had a special gift for hearing the notes." Ethan hesitated for a moment before continuing. "There's one thing you might find strange. I can hear when a note is wrong even from far away. Even when no one is playing, if I'm near an out-of-tune piano, I know exactly which key is off." "That's called perfect pitch," explained William, clearly impressed. "It's a very rare gift. Only 1 in 10,000 people is born with that ability. My father always said I was special." Ethan smiled for the first time since he'd entered the conservatory. "But after he got sick, there was no money left to maintain the instruments we had at home. We had to sell everything." Michael, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, finally spoke up. "All right, you tuned the piano, but that doesn't mean you actually understand music. Any monkey can be trained to press keys." "Michael," scolded Sophia, shocked by the rudeness. "What? I'm just being realistic. Tuning is one thing. Playing is completely different." William watched the tension grow in the room. He had known Michael for years and knew the pianist had always been arrogant, but this display of cruelty was crossing the line. "Ethan," the conductor said softly, "do you know how to play anything?" The boy lowered his eyes again. "A little. My father taught me some simple melodies when we still had the piano at home, but it's been over a year since I've played. Would you like to try?" William gestured toward the newly tuned piano. "I don't know if I should. What if I break something?" "You won't break anything," assured Sophia, stepping closer with an encouraging smile. "Anyone who tunes a piano so perfectly certainly knows how to play it too." Ethan looked around the elegant hall. The walls were decorated with portraits of great composers, and the ceiling had perfect acoustics that made every sound echo majestically. It was very different from the small room where he used to practice with his father. "Just a simple tune," he murmured, timidly approaching the piano bench. He sat down and adjusted the bench height with an almost reverent care. His small hands hovered over the keys for a moment, as if choosing the right words for an important conversation. Then he began to play. The first notes of Fur-Elise echoed through the hall with a purity that made everyone stop breathing. But it wasn't just the technique that impressed. There was something in the boy's interpretation that transcended the mechanics of the keys. It was as if he were telling a story through the music. Eleanor dropped her cello and approached the piano, mesmerized. Sophia felt chills running up her arms. Even William, who had heard that piece hundreds of times throughout his career, was seeing it from a new perspective. Michael, however, turned pale. The boy's technique was imperfect at times, but the musicality was something he, even with all his classical training, had never been able to achieve. When Ethan finished, the silence that followed was more eloquent than any applause. The echo of the last note still vibrated in the air when William finally found his voice. "Where did you learn that piece?" "I heard you rehearsing yesterday," confessed Ethan, blushing. "I sometimes sit in the square in front of the conservatory after I finish work. The sound leaks through the windows and I like to listen." "You played it from memory?" asked Eleanor, incredulous. "After hearing it only once?" "Twice, actually. You rehearsed the day before yesterday, too." Sophia exchanged meaningful glances with William. This went far beyond natural talent. It was a genuine prodigy. "Ethan," said William slowly, "would you like to participate in tonight's concert?" The boy nearly fell off the bench. "Me, but I don't know anything about concerts, and these clothes—" "We can handle that," interrupted Eleanor quickly. "I have a son your age. I can fetch proper clothes from my house. But I've never played for so many people. What if I make a mistake? What if I forget the music in the middle?" William approached and placed a paternal hand on the boy's shoulder. "You just showed us you have an extraordinary gift. It would be a shame not to share that with the world. Besides," added Sophia, "this is a benefit concert. All the money raised goes to families in need. You'd be helping people going through difficulties similar to yours." Michael, who had watched the entire conversation in silence, finally exploded. "This is ridiculous. You want to put an inexperienced kid on stage to play alongside professional musicians. It's a lack of respect for the audience who paid to hear us." "The audience paid to hear good music," William retorted firmly, "and I just heard one of the most moving interpretations in recent years." "He doesn't even know how to read sheet music," insisted Michael. All eyes turned to Ethan, who confirmed with an embarrassed nod. "My father was going to teach me, but he got sick before the lesson started. I learn everything by ear." "That makes his talent even more impressive," said Eleanor. "Mozart also composed before he knew how to write music." The discussion continued for a few more minutes, but it was clear William had made his decision. Ethan would participate in the concert, and Michael would have to accept it. 2 hours later, Ethan was backstage at the conservatory wearing a borrowed suit that was slightly too big, but made him look like a little gentleman. Eleanor had combed his brown hair with gel, and Sophia had made sure his shoes were impeccably clean. "I'm nervous," confessed Ethan, his hands trembling slightly. "It's normal," reassured William. "We all get nervous before a performance. But remember, you're not here to impress anyone. You're here to share your music." From the stage, the sounds of the first numbers were coming through. The concert had begun with a piece for string quartet, followed by a violin solo by Sophia. With each piece, the applause grew warmer. "You will be the fourth number," explained William, right after Michael's piano solo. As if he had heard his name, Michael appeared backstage. There was a strange expression on his face, a mix of nervousness and something that seemed almost regret. "Young man," he called, approaching Ethan. "I wanted to say that, well, perhaps I was a bit harsh with you earlier." Ethan looked at him with surprise. "It's all right, sir. I understand you were protecting the school." "It wasn't just that," admitted Michael, running his hand through his perfectly styled hair. "How long have you been playing?" "Since I was 8, but I only started learning real music when I was 10. 2 years of experience," Michael murmured to himself. "I have studied piano for 25 years. There was something in his voice that Ethan couldn't identify. It wasn't anger, but a kind of melancholy resignation. "You play very well," Ethan said sincerely. "I heard you rehearsing yesterday. That piece by Chopin was beautiful." Michael smiled for the first time since they had met. "Thank you. And Ethan, good luck on stage." When it was Michael's turn to play, Ethan watched from the wings. The pianist performed a Chopin nocturne with absolute technical perfection. Every note was in the right place, every rhythm was precise, every dynamic was marked exactly as in the score. It was an impeccable performance. But as he listened, Ethan realized something was missing. The music was correct, but it wasn't alive. It was like a beautiful painting without a soul. When Michael finished, the applause was respectful, but not enthusiastic. He returned backstage with a pensive expression. "Now it's your turn," said William, putting a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Remember what we talked about?" "Play with the heart, not just with the fingers," repeated Ethan. "Exactly. Now go out there and show them why music exists." Ethan walked onto the stage with small but determined steps. The hall was packed. Society ladies from New York sat in the front rows, wearing jewels that sparkled under the crystal chandeliers. Businessmen whispered to each other while checking their golden watches. When the boy appeared on stage, a murmur of surprise ran through the audience. Clearly, they did not expect to see a child among the evening's musicians. Ethan sat at the piano and adjusted the bench. For a moment, he felt all those hundreds of eyes on him, and panic nearly took over. His hands began to tremble, and he thought about getting up and running. Then he closed his eyes and thought of his father at home, coughing alone in the small apartment. He thought of all the nights he had spent in the square, listening to the music leaking from the school's windows. He thought of the joy he felt every time he managed to tune a piano perfectly, and he began to play. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out, now continuing. The music that emerged from the piano was no longer Fur Elise. It was something completely new, a melody that Ethan had never heard before, but that seemed to spring naturally from his hands. It was as if the piano was telling its own story through the boy's fingers. The audience, which had begun the evening with polished expectation, was gradually enveloped by something much more powerful. Conversations ceased completely. Programs stopped rustling. Even the sound of the ladies' heels on the wooden floor disappeared. Ethan played with his eyes closed, completely lost in the music. It was not a performance to impress or to please. It was an intimate conversation between him and the instrument, and the audience had been invited to witness it. In the front rows, a lady with white hair and a navy blue dress discreetly wiped away a tear. Mrs. Elizabeth Sinclair had dedicated her life to music as a patron of the arts, but she rarely felt genuinely moved during performances. This was different. This touched something deep in her soul. When Ethan finished, the silence was absolute. For long seconds, no one moved. Then Mrs. Sinclair stood up and began to applaud. One by one, the rest of the audience followed her, until the entire hall was on its feet in a standing ovation that lasted more than 5 minutes. Backstage, William was cleaning his glasses with trembling hands. Eleanor was crying openly. Sophia held her violin against her chest as if it were a talisman. And Michael was leaning against the wall looking at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time. When Ethan finally left the stage, still dazed by the applause, he was greeted with warm hugs from the entire team. But before he could fully process what had happened, an elegant voice called out to him, "Young pianist, may I speak with you for a moment?" It was Mrs. Elizabeth Sinclair. Even Ethan, who didn't know the classical music world of New York, could tell she was someone important by the way people bowed slightly as she passed. "Mrs. Sinclair," greeted William, quickly approaching, "what an honor to have you here tonight." "The honor was mine, Maestro William. It's been a long time since I've heard something so authentic," she said without taking her eyes off Ethan. "What's your name, dear?" "Ethan Miller, ma'am." "And where do you study piano, Ethan?" The boy exchanged nervous glances with William before answering. "I don't study, ma'am. I mean, not officially. My father taught me a few things, but—" "Is your father a musician?" "He was a piano tuner. Now he's sick." Mrs. Sinclair nodded slowly, as if several pieces of a puzzle were falling into place in her mind. "And would you like to study music formally?" "More than anything in the world," Ethan replied without hesitation. "But we don't have the money for that." "I see," said Mrs. Sinclair thoughtfully. "William, may we speak privately after the concert?" "Of course, Mrs. Sinclair." The rest of the evening passed in a blur for Ethan. There were a few more performances, words of thanks, and a cocktail where elegant people ate small sandwiches and talked about art. Several people approached him to praise his performance, but their words went through his mind without really registering. All he could think about was his father's face when he told him about the evening. Robert Miller might not believe that his son had played at the Manhattan School of Music for hundreds of people. When the event finally ended and the last guests had left, William called Ethan to join him in his office. Mrs. Sinclair was already there, sitting in a leather armchair and flipping through some papers. "Sit down, Ethan," she said kindly. "I want to make you a proposal." The boy obeyed, his hands slightly sweaty. 40 years ago, my late husband and I created a foundation to support young musical talents. We offer full scholarships to children with exceptional potential who don't have the financial means to study music. Ethan felt his heart beating so loudly he was sure the others could hear it. "I would like to offer you one of these scholarships. You would study here at the Manhattan School of Music with the best teachers in the city. We would also welcome your father into our healthcare assistance program." "Does that mean—" "He could get treatment?" asked Ethan, his voice almost disappearing with emotion. "Exactly. And you would have lessons in piano, music theory, harmony, composition, everything you need to develop your extraordinary talent." Ethan was silent, trying to process the information. It was too good to be true. There must be some catch. "What's the problem?" he finally asked. Mrs. Elizabeth smiled. "There's no problem, dear, just one condition." There it was. Ethan waited, preparing for the worst. "The condition is that you dedicate yourself completely to your studies. Music isn't just talent, it's discipline. You would have to practice several hours a day, study theory, do technical exercises. It would be a lot of work. I accept, Ethan said immediately. I'll do anything. I'll study as much as needed. I haven't finished yet, continued Mrs. Elizabeth, but her expression was kind. You would also have to play at some foundation events. Nothing too formal, just small performances for our donors. Would you be capable of that? Yes, ma'am, of course. Then it's decided, announced William, smiling broadly. Ethan, welcome to the Manhattan School of Music. That night, Ethan ran through the empty streets of New York City as if he had wings on his feet. At every block he stopped to make sure he wasn't dreaming. When he finally reached the small apartment where he lived with his father, he found Robert awake, coughing in the living room. "Dad!" shouted Ethan, bursting through the door. "You won't believe what happened." "Ethan, what time is it? Where were you?" "At the conservatory, Dad. I played at the conservatory for hundreds of people, and an important lady offered me a scholarship, and you'll be able to get treatment." Robert blinked several times, trying to process the whirlwind of information. "Slow down, son. Tell me everything from the beginning." Ethan sat next to his father on the worn-out sofa and told the whole story. With every detail, Robert's eyes shone brighter. When the boy finished, his father was crying. "I always knew you were special," said Robert, hugging his son. "I always knew that one day the whole world would know too. And now you're going to get better, Dad." "The lady said there's a medical program at the foundation. Ethan, are you sure this wasn't all a dream?" In response, the boy showed the business card Mrs. Elizabeth had given him. "Sinclair Foundation for the Arts" was printed in gold letters. "It's real, Dad, it's all real." Father and son spent the rest of the early morning awake, making plans for the future. For the first time in months, there was hope in the small apartment. The following Monday, Ethan showed up at the conservatory at 8 o'clock sharp, carrying the same tool case he had brought the first time. William greeted him personally and took him to meet his new teachers. Professor Catherine Wilson would be responsible for his piano technique. At 40 years old, she had studied in Europe and had a reputation for being strict but fair. Professor Jonathan Smith would take care of music theory and harmony, and Mrs. Eleanor had offered to teach him about chamber music. "Your first lesson will be with Professor Catherine," explained William, taking Ethan to a smaller room equipped with an upright piano. "She will assess your current level and create a suitable study program." Professor Catherine was a thin woman with black hair pulled into a tight bun. She wore thick-rimmed glasses and had a posture that demanded immediate respect. "So you're the famous Ethan," she said, examining him from head to toe. "I heard you played very well at the benefit concert." "Thank you, Professor. But playing well once doesn't mean you're a pianist. Being a professional musician requires much more than natural talent. It requires discipline, study, sacrifice." Ethan swallowed hard. The professor continued, "I'll be honest with you from the start. I've seen many prodigies come through here. Most give up when they discover how much work is involved. Are you sure you're prepared for this?" "Yes, Professor, I'm prepared for anything." "We'll see. Sit at the piano and play something, anything." Ethan sat down and began to play the same improvised melody he had performed at the concert. But after a few measures, Professor Catherine interrupted him. "Stop. Your posture is wrong. Your hands are tense. You're using the pedal unevenly. And your breathing isn't coordinated with the music." Ethan looked at her confused. "But it worked at the concert." "It worked because you have natural talent. But talent without proper technique is like having a sports car with bald tires. It might work for a while, but eventually you'll have problems." For the next hour, Professor Catherine taught Ethan how to sit correctly at the piano. She adjusted the bench height, the position of his arms, the curvature of his fingers. It was much more complicated than he had imagined. "Now, play a C major scale, just a simple scale." Ethan obeyed, but she interrupted him again. "Too rigid. You're tensing your shoulders and your thumb is collapsing. Let's try again." It took 45 minutes for Ethan to play a simple scale in a way that minimally satisfied the teacher. When the lesson ended, he was exhausted and somewhat discouraged. "Don't worry," said Professor Catherine, noticing his expression. Rome wasn't built in a day. You have great talent, Ethan, but talent without a solid technical foundation is like building a house on sand. Professor, may I ask a question? Of course. Why did Mr. Michael play so technically well at the concert, but didn't move people the way I did? Professor Catherine smiled for the first time since they had met. That's a very smart question. Michael has perfect technique, but he lost the emotional connection to the music over the years. You have the emotional connection, but you need the technique to support it. My job is to give you the technique without you losing your musical soul. In the following months, Ethan immersed himself completely in his studies. He woke up at 6 in the morning to practice scales before going to the conservatory. He spent 4 hours a day studying music theory with Professor Jonathan. In the afternoon, he had piano lessons with Professor Catherine. And in the evenings, he studied harmony and composition. It was exhausting, but Ethan never complained. Each new piece he learned, each theoretical concept he mastered, each technical exercise he could perform correctly, was a personal victory. His father began medical treatment during Ethan's second week of studies. The Foundation's doctors were optimistic. With the right medication and regular physical therapy, Robert could recover completely in 6 months. "How was your lesson today?" Robert would ask every night when Ethan came home. "Hard but good," was always the boy's response. "Professor Catherine said my technique is improving. And Professor Jonathan taught me about key modulations. I don't understand any of that, but I'm proud to see how dedicated you are. It's for you, Dad, for both of us." 3 months after starting his studies, Ethan had his first official performance as a Foundation scholar. It was a small recital for the institution's donors, held at Mrs. Elizabeth's home. The event was much more intimate than the benefit concert, but in some ways more intimidating. There were only 20 people in the room, all sitting very close to the piano. Ethan could see every expression, every reaction. He had chosen to play a Bach invention, a technically challenging piece that demonstrated both his technical progress and his natural musicality. When he finished, the applause was warm and sincere. But what touched Ethan most was the expression on Mrs. Elizabeth's face. There was pride there, and also something that looked like hope. "Very well done, dear," she said after the performance. "You're progressing wonderfully. Thank you for believing in me, Mrs. Elizabeth. I don't believe in you, Ethan. I know you're special. There is a difference." That night, Ethan returned home with a feeling of accomplishment he had never experienced before. He was on the right path. All the hours of study, all the discipline, all the effort were paying off. But the next day, something unexpected happened that would change the course of his entire journey. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Ethan arrived at the conservatory on Tuesday morning to find a group of people chatting excitedly in the entrance hall. He recognized some of the orchestra musicians, but there were other faces he didn't know. "What's going on?" he asked Eleanor, who was among the group. "A letter arrived from Europe," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "The Vienna Conservatory is offering a full scholarship to a young American pianist." "Vienna? In Austria?" "Exactly. It's one of the most prestigious music institutions in the world. Whoever gets this scholarship will have access to the best teachers in Europe and opportunities that don't exist anywhere in South America." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "And who can apply?" "Any American pianist between 10 and 15 years old," replied William, approaching the group. "But there's a catch. They only want one candidate. The conservatory must choose who to send for the final audition. And how will that choice be made?" "Internal competition," explained William. "All interested candidates will perform here at the conservatory. A panel of judges will choose the winner." Ethan felt a mix of excitement and terror. This was the opportunity of a lifetime, but it would also mean leaving the United States, leaving his father who was still recovering. "When is the competition?" he asked. "In 6 weeks. Enough time for the candidates to prepare properly." For the rest of the day, Ethan couldn't concentrate in class. His mind was torn between the excitement of the possibility and the anguish of having to make such an important decision. When he got home, he told his father everything. "It's an incredible chance, Ethan," said Robert. though his voice revealed a sadness he was trying to hide. "But I can't leave you here alone. You're still in treatment. Son, you can't pass up an opportunity like this because of me. It's not just because of you, Dad, it's that I'm scared. What if I'm not good enough? What if I disappoint everyone?" Robert sat down next to his son on the couch. "Ethan, do you remember the first time you saw me tune a piano? I remember I was 6 years old. I was fascinated watching you work. And do you remember what you asked?" Ethan smiled. "I asked if it was hard. And what did I say? That everything worth having in life is hard, but we don't give up just because it's hard." "Exactly. And now I'm telling you the same thing. Go after this scholarship. If you get it, go to Europe. If you don't, at least you tried." "But what about you? How will you manage without me?" "I'll be fine. The doctors said in 2 months I can go back to work, and you won't be in Europe forever. It's just a period of study." That night, Ethan made his decision. He would enter the competition. The next morning, he sought out Professor Catherine to tell her of his intention. "Excellent choice," she said, smiling. "You have the potential to win this competition." "Do you really think so?" "I do, but it will take a lot of work. 6 weeks isn't much time to prepare for something of this magnitude. I'm willing to work as hard as necessary." "Then let's start immediately. First, you need to choose what piece you'll play. For an audition at this level, I recommend something challenging, but that shows your musical personality." They spent the next hour discussing options. Professor Catherine suggested several classical pieces suitable for Ethan's level, but none seemed quite right. "What if I compose something?" Ethan suddenly suggested. Professor Catherine raised her eyebrows. "Compose? You never mentioned you composed." "Because I've never officially composed, but sometimes when I'm practicing I create little melodies, like the one I played at the benefit concert." "It would be very risky. The judges will be expecting something familiar, something they can compare with other interpretations. But it would also be unique. No one else could play it exactly like me because it would be my own music." Professor Catherine was thoughtful for a long moment. "It's an interesting idea, but we'd have to work hard on the composition. 6 weeks to create and master a new piece is very little time." "I can do it," Ethan said determinedly. "I know I can." "All right, but also prepare a classical piece as backup, in case the composition isn't ready in time." In the following weeks, Ethan practically lived at the conservatory. He arrived before sunrise and left after sunset. Half the time he worked on composing his original piece. The other half he spent perfecting his interpretation of a Chopin nocturne he had chosen as backup. The composition was harder than he had imagined. Professor Catherine taught him about musical structures, thematic development, advanced harmony. It was like learning a new language. "Music is emotional mathematics," she explained during lessons. "Every note must have a purpose. Every pause must communicate something." Ethan absorbed each lesson like a sponge. His nights at home were spent scribbling musical ideas on scraps of paper, experimenting with melodies in his head. "You're working too hard," said Robert one night, seeing his son asleep on a pile of handwritten scores. "I need to do this, Dad. It's my only chance." "It's not your only chance, Ethan. It's just one chance. If it doesn't work out, others will come." "But this one is special. It's Europe, Dad. Imagine what I could learn there." Robert knew it was useless to argue. He recognized in his son the same stubborn determination he himself had had when young. 2 weeks before the competition, Ethan finally finished his composition. It was a 7-minute piece that told the story of his musical journey, starting with simple melodies representing his first steps with his father, evolving into more complex passages symbolizing his studies at the conservatory, and culminating in a triumphant finale representing his dreams for the future. "It's beautiful," said Professor Catherine after hearing the first complete performance, "but technically very challenging. Are you sure you can master it in 2 weeks?" "I have to." And he did. By the week of the competition, Ethan played his composition with a fluency that even impressed Professor Catherine. Every note was in the right place, every musical phrase communicated exactly what he intended. But there was one problem that hadn't been resolved. On the Friday before the competition, Michael sought out Ethan in the conservatory halls. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" the pianist asked. "Of course, Mr. Michael." They walked to an empty room. Michael seemed nervous, which was strange considering his normally confident personality. "Ethan, I want to apologize for how I treated you when we first met." "You don't need to apologize. You were just—" "I was being an idiot," Michael interrupted. "And I was acting that way because I became envious." Ethan was surprised. "Envious? You have something I lost a long time ago. When I started studying piano, I was like you, I played with heart. But over the years, with all the pressure to be technically perfect, I forgot why I started playing." "But you play very well, technically." "Technique without soul is merely exercise, Ethan. You reminded me of that during the benefit concert night." They remained silent for a moment before Michael continued. "I heard you're entering the competition for the Vienna scholarship." "I am. And that I've also applied." Ethan felt the ground open beneath his feet. "You're competing against me." "I am, and I want you to know I'll give it my all. But I also want you to know I'm rooting for the best to win, regardless of who it is." "Thank you for telling me," said Ethan, though his mind was racing. Michael had 10 more years of experience, superior technical training, and knew the classical repertoire far better. How could he compete with that? "Ethan," said Michael as if reading his thoughts, "don't give up before you've even tried. You have something special. Use it." The weekend before the competition, Ethan could barely sleep. He practiced his composition mentally at every free moment, visualizing every finger movement, every expression he wanted to convey. "You're too nervous," said his father on Sunday evening. "It won't help." "How can I not be nervous? It's the chance of a lifetime. And you're prepared for it. Now you need to trust yourself." On Monday, the day of the competition, Ethan arrived at the conservatory 2 hours early. The main hall had been prepared for the event. There was a table with 3 chairs for the judges, William, Mrs. Elizabeth, and a visiting professor from New York University. 5 other candidates had also applied, all appearing older and more experienced than Ethan. Michael was among them, wearing his usual tuxedo with a determined expression. "Candidates will perform in alphabetical order," announced William. "Each will have 15 minutes on stage." Ethan would be the 4th to play. He watched the first 3 performances from the audience, trying to remain calm. All candidates were technically competent and played well-known classical pieces with admirable precision. Then his turn came. He walked to the stage with steady steps, but felt his heart beating so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. He sat at the piano and adjusted the bench. "Ethan," said William from the microphone, "what piece will you perform for us today?" "An original composition," replied Ethan, his voice echoing through the hall. "It's called Journey." A murmur of surprise ran through the few spectators present. Original compositions were extremely rare in competitions like this. Ethan placed his hands on the keys, closed his eyes for a moment, and began to play. The first notes were simple, almost childlike. They represented his first lessons with his father in their small apartment. But gradually, the music grew more complex, incorporating elements he had learned during his months of formal study. There were passages showing his technical evolution, moments of doubt and uncertainty, represented by dissonant harmonies and bursts of joy when he overcame each obstacle. But what truly set his performance apart from all others was the raw emotion he conveyed. Ethan wasn't just playing notes on the piano, he was telling his story, sharing his soul with every person present. When he reached the finale, a triumphant passage representing his dreams for the future, there were tears in the eyes of several spectators. The silence that followed was more eloquent than any applause. Ethan opened his eyes and saw the judges looking at him with expressions he couldn't decipher. "Thank you, Ethan," said William, his voice slightly trembling. Ethan left the stage and sat down to watch the final 2 performances. Michael was the last to play, performing a Chopin etude with absolute technical perfection. It was a masterful performance, demonstrating years of study and dedication. When everyone had finished, the judges withdrew to deliberate. The candidates waited in the entrance hall, the silence heavy with tension and expectation. "Good luck," said Michael, approaching Ethan. "Thank you. Good luck to you, too. You played magnificently. Your composition it was everything music should be. Before Ethan could respond, William reappeared. We've reached a decision, he announced. The candidate chosen to represent the conservatory in the final audition in Vienna is... The silence stretched for seconds that felt like hours. Ethan Miller. Ethan stood still for a moment, unable to process the information. Then Michael hugged him, followed by Professor Catherine, Eleanor, and all the others. I can't believe it, murmured Ethan. Did I really win? You won and deserved it, said Mrs. Elizabeth, approaching with a radiant smile. Your music touched our hearts in a way pure technique never could. When is the audition in Vienna? Asked Ethan, still dazed. In 3 weeks, replied William. Enough time to organize your trip and complete the paperwork. That night, Ethan and his father celebrated with a simple dinner in the apartment. Robert was too proud to speak. He just smiled and shook his head from time to time, as if he still couldn't believe what was happening. Dad, are you sure you'll be all right alone? Son, stop worrying about me. This is your moment. Enjoy every second. I'm going to miss you. I'll miss you too, but it will only be for a short time, and when you return, you'll be a pianist trained in Europe. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparations. Mrs. Elizabeth took care of all the necessary paperwork and documentation. Professor Catherine prepared Ethan for what to expect at the audition. Eleanor sewed him a new suit to wear during the performance. The night before the trip, the conservatory organized a small farewell party. All the teachers and staff were present, along with several students and even some of the musicians who had played at the original benefit concert. This isn't a goodbye, said William in his brief speech. It's a celebration of the beginning of a new journey. Ethan is going to Europe representing not only our conservatory, but also American musical talent. And regardless of the audition's outcome, added Mrs. Elizabeth, he has already won the hardest part, believing in himself. Michael also made a point of speaking with Ethan before the party ended. I want you to know that losing to you was one of the best things that happened to me in recent years, he said. It reminded me why I started playing the piano. What will you do now? I'm going to start teaching. Underprivileged children like you were. Maybe I can help other young talents find their way. That's wonderful. And you? Nervous about the audition? Scared to death, admitted Ethan, but also excited. It's everything I've ever wanted. Then it can't go wrong. The next day, Ethan said goodbye to his father at the airport. Robert was much better, almost completely recovered from the lung problem. Play for them the same way you played at the conservatory, said the father, hugging his son. With your heart. I'll play thinking of you, Dad. No, play thinking of yourself, your future, your dreams. I'll be right here, waiting when you return. The trip to Vienna was the first time Ethan had left the United States. Everything was new and intimidating. The huge airport, people speaking different languages, the strange airplane food. But it was also exciting. When he finally arrived in the Austrian capital, he was impressed by the city's beauty. The streets were clean and orderly. The buildings had a majestic architecture that breathed history. And on every corner there were reminders of the country's rich musical tradition, statues of famous composers, posters advertising concerts, musical instrument stores. The Vienna Conservatory was even more impressive than the one in New York City. The main building dated back to the 18th century, and its rooms had perfect acoustics developed over hundreds of years. Ethan felt as if he were walking through the same halls where Mozart and Beethoven had studied. The audition would be the next day. Ethan spent the afternoon visiting the conservatory, familiarizing himself with the piano he would use for the performance. It was a Bösendorfer Imperial Grand, an instrument that cost more than most houses in the United States. Nervous? Asked a voice behind him. Ethan turned and saw a girl apparently his age, with blonde hair and blue eyes. Very, he admitted. And you? Me too. I'm Olivia from Germany. Ethan from the United States. First time in Vienna? First time outside the United States, actually. Olivia smiled. It's an amazing city, music on every corner. My teacher always said that Vienna has music in the air you breathe. They talked for a few minutes about their respective musical journeys. Olivia had started playing at 4 years old and had already won several international competitions. Ethan felt even more intimidated. "And what piece will you play tomorrow?" asked Olivia. "An original composition," said Ethan, expecting the surprised reaction that always came. "Really? How brave. I would never have the courage to play something I composed myself in such an important audition." "That's what everyone said, but it's the music that best represents who I am." "It must be very special then." That night, Ethan could barely sleep. He lay awake thinking about his father in New York City, about teacher Catherine and her rigorous lessons, about Mrs. Elizabeth and her generosity, about William and his confidence. On the morning of the audition, Ethan woke up early and practiced his composition mentally several times. He had a light breakfast and dressed in the new suit that Eleanor had made especially for the occasion. The conservatory was full of applicants from all over Europe when he arrived. There were young pianists from France, Germany, Italy, Russia, even one from China. Everyone seemed confident and experienced. The audition would be held in the main hall of the conservatory, a majestic room with a vaulted ceiling and golden decoration. The Bösendorfer piano was positioned in the center, surrounded by chairs where the judges would sit. Ethan was 13th on the list of 20 candidates. He spent the morning listening to the other performances, each more impressive than the last. The technical level was extraordinary. These young pianists represented the musical elite of their respective countries. When his turn came, Ethan walked to the piano with the same determination he had shown at the Manhattan School of Music. But this time, he felt the weight of representing not only himself, but the entire United States. "Ethan Miller, from the United States," announced the audition director. "What piece will you perform for us today?" "An original composition titled Journey," replied Ethan, his voice echoing through the majestic room. He sat at the piano and placed his hands on the keys. For a moment, he closed his eyes and thought of the small apartment where it all began. He thought of his father coughing in the living room, of the night sleeping in the square to hear music leaking from the conservatory windows, of the first time Mrs. Elizabeth believed in him. And he began to play. The music that emerged from the Bösendorfer was the same he had played at the Manhattan School of Music, but amplified by the perfect acoustics of the Viennese hall. Each note resonated with crystalline purity. Each musical phrase developed with an eloquence that transcended language barriers. Ethan played with his eyes closed, completely lost in his own musical story. He was no longer nervous. He wasn't thinking about the judges or the other candidates. He was just talking to the piano, telling its story through the keys. When he finished, the silence was absolute. No noise, no movement, only the echo of the last notes vibrating in the air. Ethan opened his eyes and saw tears on the faces of several judges. One of them, an elderly man who had been introduced as the former director of the Vienna Philharmonic, was cleaning his glasses with trembling hands. "Thank you, Mr. Miller," said the audition director, his voice clearly emotional. Ethan left the stage knowing he had given his best. Regardless of the result, he had played with all his heart and soul. The last 7 performances were technically perfect, but after hearing Ethan's musical story, they seemed cold and calculated. When the last candidate finished, the judges withdrew to deliberate. The candidates waited in an adjacent room. Olivia sat next to Ethan. "Your music was beautiful," she said sincerely. "I've never heard anything like it." "Thank you. Your interpretation of Rachmaninoff was also incredible." "Just technique. What you did was much more than technique." 2 hours later, the judges returned. The audition director carried a sealed envelope. "We have reached a decision," he announced, "but before revealing the result, we want to say that this was one of the highest levels of candidates we have ever seen. All of you are exceptional musicians." He opened the envelope. "The candidate selected for the full scholarship to the Vienna Conservatory is..." The silence stretched for an eternity. "Ethan Miller, from the United States." The world stopped for a moment. Ethan sat there, unable to process what he had heard. Then Olivia hugged him, followed by several other candidates who came to congratulate him. "I can't believe it," murmured Ethan. "I can't believe I made it." The former director of the Philharmonic approached him. "Young Ethan, in 50 years of evaluating musicians, I have rarely heard something as pure and authentic as your composition. You don't just play the piano, you speak through it." "Thank you, sir. I can't wait to start my studies." "And we can't wait to teach you. Welcome to the Vienna Conservatory." That night, Ethan called his father from his hotel room. "Dad, I made it. I won the scholarship." On the other end of the line, he heard Robert start to cry. "I knew it," said his father between sobs. "I always knew you were special. Now I'm going to study here for 2 years. I'll learn from the best teachers in Europe. And I'll be here waiting when you come back, completely healed and working again. Dad, none of this would have happened without you. You're the one who taught me that music comes from the heart, and you're the one who turned that lesson into something extraordinary." Over the next 2 years, Ethan immersed himself completely in his studies at the Vienna Conservatory. He studied with teachers who had taught some of the world's greatest pianists. He learned about the history of classical music, advanced interpretation techniques, and composition at a university level. But most importantly, he never lost the emotional connection to music that set him apart from other technically perfect pianists. During his time in Vienna, Ethan composed several other pieces, all inspired by his experiences. One of them, called Memories of New York, became so popular that it was performed by the Vienna Symphony Orchestra. He also kept in regular contact with everyone back in the United States. Professor Catherine sent letters with tips and exercises. Mrs. Elizabeth sent news from the conservatory, and his father called every week to tell him about his recovery and his new job at a musical instrument store. At the end of the second year, Ethan was invited to perform a farewell concert at the Vienna Conservatory itself. The hall was packed with teachers, students, and members of the Viennese musical elite. He played several pieces, classics by Mozart and Beethoven that he had mastered during his studies, and also his own compositions. But he ended the concert with Journey, the same piece that had opened all doors for him. The ovation lasted 15 minutes. When it finally ceased, the director of the conservatory stepped onto the stage. "Ethan Miller came to our conservatory as a young talent from the United States," he said. "He returns to his country as one of the most promising pianists of his generation, regardless of nationality." But more important than his technical evolution was his ability to maintain his musical authenticity. In a world where many pianists sound the same, Ethan developed a unique and unmistakable voice. 2 weeks later, Ethan was back in New York City. John F. Kennedy International Airport was decorated with welcome banners organized by the Manhattan School of Music. William Thompson, Mrs. Elizabeth Sinclair, Eleanor Davis, Professor Catherine Wilson, Michael Johnson, and dozens of others were waiting for him. But the person he most wanted to see was right at the front of the group. "Dad!" shouted Ethan, running into Robert's arms. "My son," said his father, hugging him tightly. "I'm so proud of you. I missed you so much. Me too. But now you're home." In the following weeks, Ethan readjusted to life in New York City. He resumed his classes at the conservatory, but now as an assistant professor, helping young talents like he had once been. He also began working on a new project, a program to discover and develop children with musical talent in underprivileged communities. The program was called Music for All and offered free piano lessons to children from low-income families. Ethan believed that musical talent existed everywhere, needing only opportunity to flourish. Michael was the first to join the project as a volunteer teacher. "I want to give back some of what music has given me," he explained. 6 months after Ethan's return, the program had already discovered 3 young pianists with exceptional potential. One of them, a 9-year-old girl named Emma, demonstrated the same perfect pitch that Ethan possessed. "She reminds me of you when you were a child," said Robert, watching Emma practice scales with the same intense concentration Ethan had always shown. "That's exactly what I hoped to find," replied Ethan. "Talent waiting for an opportunity." On the program's first anniversary, the conservatory organized a special concert where the young students would present their interpretations of simple classical pieces. Ethan would be the main pianist, playing some of his compositions inspired by his European experience. The night of the concert arrived with the main hall completely packed. In the front row sat Robert, fully recovered, and working as the conservatory's official piano tuner, Mrs. Elizabeth Sinclair, proud as a grandmother, and all the teachers who had contributed to Ethan's journey. The children from the program played with a genuine passion that reminded everyone why they had fallen in love with music. Small fingers performed simple melodies with the same dedication that professional pianists showed in complex pieces. When it was Ethan's turn to play, he walked to the piano with the same humility he had shown the first time he entered that hall. But now there was a difference. He knew exactly who he was and what he wanted to communicate through his music. "Tonight, I want to play a new composition," he announced to the audience. "It's called Full Circle and is dedicated to all the people who believed in a poor boy who once offered to tune a piano in exchange for a loaf of bread." The first notes echoed through the hall with a musical maturity that reflected everything Ethan had learned and lived. The piece began with the same simplicity as Journey, but evolved into passages that incorporated elements of the European classical music he had studied in Vienna. But the heart of the composition was still the same emotional honesty that had always characterized Ethan's music. He wasn't just playing a piece, he was telling the story of how a dream can come true when you combine talent, determination, and people willing to believe. When he finished, the ovation was instant and prolonged. But Ethan was looking at his father in the front row, who had tears of pride streaming down his face. After the concert, during the cocktail hour, many people approached Ethan to congratulate him. Journalists wanted to interview him about his experience in Vienna. Other musicians were interested in future collaborations. But the conversation that touched him the most was with Emma, the 9-year-old girl from the program. "Professor Ethan," she said, tugging on the sleeve of his tuxedo, "when I grow up, can I be a pianist like you?" Ethan knelt down to be at the girl's eye level. "Emma, you can be anything you want to be. You just need to believe in yourself and work hard." "But what if I'm not good enough? You know what my father always told me?" Ethan smiled, remembering Robert's words. "That every piano needs to be tuned from time to time, even the most expensive, the most beautiful ones. It doesn't matter if you're good enough today. What matters is if you're willing to keep tuning your music, improving a little bit every day. And will you teach me? I'll teach you everything I know. And when you learn everything I can teach you, I'll help you find even better teachers. Like Mrs. Elizabeth did for you, exactly like Mrs. Elizabeth did for me." Later that night, after everyone had left and the conservatory was silent, Ethan sat alone at the piano in the main hall. He softly played a few notes from his first composition, Journey. Robert appeared in the doorway. "Still awake?" "Just reflecting on everything that happened," said Ethan, without stopping his playing. "Regretting anything?" "Not one bit. Every choice, every difficulty, every moment of doubt was worth it to get here." Robert walked closer to the piano. "And what comes next?" "Now I teach other children to find their own music, and I keep composing, playing, learning. The music never stops, Dad. It just keeps evolving. Like you. Like all of us." Ethan played the final chords of Journey and gently closed the piano lid. "Dad, thank you for teaching me that music comes from the heart. And thank you for showing me what happens when you combine heart with opportunity and hard work." Father and son walked out of the conservatory together. On the quiet streets of New York City, under the stars that shone over the city that had watched them grow, they knew that Ethan's musical journey was just beginning. Because true music, the kind that touches hearts and transforms lives, never really ends. It just continues, passing from one generation to the next, from one heart to another, from one dream to another. And somewhere in the city, a child was awake, listening to music leaking from some conservatory window, dreaming of the day when they too could say, "Can I tune your piano in exchange for a piece of bread?" End of story. Now tell us what you thought of Ethan and Robert's story. Do you believe that true talent always finds its way, even in the most difficult circumstances? Leave your opinion in the comments, and if this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories we have prepared for you.